Throwaway because my family lurks everywhere, and because I like my life quiet now. I'm 34, male, and I own a data consultancy that basically tells mid-sized companies where their money is bleeding out. It's nerdy, spreadsheet-heavy work that I used to dream about doing from a couch with a cracked screen and a roommate who never did his dishes. Now I do it from a small office with plants that somehow haven't died and a view of a parking lot that becomes an ocean when it rains. I live alone. I wake up early, I lift, and I cook because I like the repetition. I'm not a billionaire, and I don't drive anything exotic, but I don't look at price tags for groceries anymore. I'm responsible for some people's paychecks. I have a dog who sleeps like a drawn-out S on my couch. By any reasonable metric, I did okay. That said, the quiet I have now didn't arrive gently. It came the way light comes into a room you've kept shuttered, like a knife through fabric, sharp and a little ugly. The first thing you need to know is that I grew up with a running ledger. Not a metaphorical one, though there was that too, but an actual marble notebook, the kind with a black and white cover, that sat on top of the fridge next to a chipped ceramic rooster. My mother called it the household book. My father called it the reminder. They joked about it in front of guests like it was quaint. We keep track, my mom would say, tapping the notebook with a wooden spoon. So he knows what we do for him. Then she'd laugh and stir the pot. Whatever was boiling, always too salty. The second thing you need to know is that there was a phrase in my house that functioned like a traffic light, a smoke alarm, and a padlock all in one. You owe us. It slipped into everything. If I wanted to join a field trip, you owe us. If I didn't want to eat something, you owe us. If I dropped a plate and it shattered and I stood there with my fingers stinging in glass in the linoleum, you owe us. If I tried to argue, the counters would bang with their palms, the fridge would hum too loud, and I'd go quiet because that was the path of least resistance, and resistance is expensive when you are 12 and your whole life is paid for by other people. One night when I was 8, I asked for a second bowl of cereal because I was hungry and Saturday morning cartoons were the only window in my week when laughter didn't sound like a threat. My father turned the TV down with 2 sharp clicks and looked at me for a long time. He had a way of holding a stare that made the air feel grainy, unbreathable. Second bowl, he said, like I'd requested a gold bar. Do you know what that costs? He took the marble notebook down with a theatrical sigh, flipped to a random page, and dragged his finger down a column. Milk, $2. 19. Cereal, $3. 49. Bowl, spoon, soap to wash them, the water, the electricity to run the fridge. Your mother's time. My time. He smiled without kindness. It adds up. You don't get to just take. You owe us for the life you are using. I'm 8, I said, small and stupid and honest. You are 8, my mother said, and 8 is old enough to be grateful. Another time, 4th grade, parent-teacher night. Mrs. K had written a note about my essay on rain, about how I described the sound like a million tiny nails tapping the roof, and I remember feeling the first rush of pride I can actually locate. In the car, I babbled about all of it, and my father drove silent, thick-necked, knuckles white on the wheel. At a red light, he finally said, "You think writing nice words will pay the mortgage?" My mother chimed in without looking up from a coupon flyer. Art is a hobby for people whose parents did the hard work. We're doing the hard work. You'll pay us back by making something useful of yourself. I shut my mouth so fast my teeth clicked, and the word useful started to hiss in the back of my brain like a static station I couldn't tune away from. I want to be clear, there were good days. There were warm pancakes and birthday gifts with tags that said, "We love you," in my mother's looping, church bulletin handwriting. There were afternoons when my dad tossed a football and told me to go long while the sun bled orange into the street. But even those days had a string tied to them, a string that looped back to that notebook and that phrase. Love was an installment plan, gathered interest, penalties for late payment. It was never free. If I said thank you, that was noted too, points in a column. If I forgot, the air stiffened and I'd be reminded that I was already behind. What's the tally at? I asked once, trying to make a joke out of it because if you laugh first, maybe it can't swallow you. You really want to know? My father asked, and I realized he had an actual number in his head. I shook my head. Better to not know. He grinned like a banker. Thought so. By middle school, I understood the choreography. I'd preemptively cough up a thank you for things that hadn't happened yet. I'd hand over the trash bag before being asked. I'd volunteer for dishes. Every chore was a chip off a mountain that kept growing anyway. The ledger had a life of its own. When money was tight, it got loud. When money was better, it got quiet but never gentle. High school tightened the screws. I was small, fast, good at math, terrible at self-preservation. I got a part-time job bagging groceries at a store that smelled like warm bread and bleach. I liked it because the numbers were honest, $6. 25 an hour, plus the rush of customers who said thank you and meant it. On my first payday, I brought the check home and put it on the kitchen table because I was proud and because part of me believed this would be a sign of good faith. My father slid it toward himself with 2 fingers and said, "You live here. You contribute." My mother said, "We're not monsters. You can keep 10%. I nodded like I agreed, heart pounding in my throat, and calculated 10% while trying not to cry in that humiliating way where your nose goes first. At dinner that night, the TV blared the local news and my father said to the air, "Kids these days." Entitled. My mother clucked her tongue. "We raised you right," she said. "You'll pay us back for everything someday. We're not worried." I said I wasn't worried either, and my fork scraped the plate like a scream in a quiet room. There was a script for big moments. When I got into a state college on a modest scholarship, they congratulated me with a hug that left my ribs buzzing, and then they brought out the notebook. Tuition, books, gas money if you want to come home on weekends. "You think scholarships cover groceries?" My dad asked. My mom's eyes were shiny, sweet with the victory of having made a boy who could leave. "We'll help," she said, "and you'll remember." I signed the dotted line on my financial aid packet with the sensation that I was signing a loan with no amortization table, just a promise and a trap. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before the cap and gown and the late nights studying on an empty stomach and the job that kept me upright, there was the house. The house was a 2-story in a neighborhood where the yards did a tight little dance between tidy and tired. Our roof had a patch shaped like a dog. The carpets were forever in that stage between stained and beige. The kitchen window looked out on a fence that leaned like it was tired of standing guard. The front door stuck in the summer and rattled in the winter. I learned the sounds of it the way some people learn their own heartbeat. I learned to listen for the way my father's key scraped the lock, which meant he was angry, or the way it turned smooth, which meant he was not yet angry but could become so. I learned to adjust my breathing around them. I learned to be grateful for small mercies. A night where no one told me I was expensive, a Sunday afternoon with a bowl of grapes that I ate slowly, reverently, as if I were robbing a museum where the alarms didn't go off yet. I tell this like I'm looking at it through a glass case, but I'm not immune to it. There is a heat in my chest, even typing this, that makes my fingers stiff. The old scripts tug. The old quiet tries to swallow me. But I wanted to write it all down, at least part of it, because if you're going to understand what I did, you have to understand the calculus they taught me. They taught me that the world is a ledger, that your worth is a sum that can be toted up on a kitchen counter, that love is an invoice. I learned it so well I almost never unlearned it. One last scene for now. Senior year. I'm late, juggling a stack of mail and a backpack that smells like gym socks. My mother stands at the counter, the rooster beside the notebook like a guard. "We got your bank statement," she says. Yes, she opened my mail. "We pay for this roof," she'd say. "Privacy is for people who pay their own way. You bought lunch 3 times last week." Her voice is mild, a little hurt. "Are we not feeding you?" My father didn't look up from the sink. "He's practicing wasting money," he said. "Start as you mean to go on." The shame slammed me like a door. "It was pizza day," I said, because what else can you say to a balance sheet that doesn't list pizza day as a category? My mother made a note in the book, pin scratching. "We'll just add it," she said, almost lovingly. "You'll make it up to us someday." I remember thinking, maybe I will. And then, sharp and quiet, underneath all the numbers, a different thought that felt like tearing paper. Maybe I won't. Senior year cracked open like a poorly sealed jar. I was counting down to 18 like it was a finish line that would fling me off a treadmill. My parents were counting too, but for different reasons. They had a plan for repayment, a word that landed like a brick in my stomach. My mother folded college brochures like she was folding napkins for a wake. "We'll do loans in our name," she said. "So you owe us, not the bank." My father, rinsing a coffee mug so hard the ceramic squeaked, said, "Interest is what you pay when you're late. Don't be late." I smiled at a spot on the wall and imagined carving a door into it. I got a scholarship that covered part of tuition. I did FAFSA with a guidance counselor because my mother insisted on bringing the Rooster notebook. She flipped it open during our appointment like the federal government should consult line items for sneakers, size 9, and call to the plumber. The counselor, a tired woman with kind eyes, said, gently, "This isn't necessary here." My mother's smile tightened. "It's necessary to him." I apologized to the air for existing, then apologized in my head to myself for apologizing. I turned 18 2 weeks before graduation. I expected a bill as a birthday card. What I got was a cake with "Welcome to Adulthood" piped in blue and a card with $50 in it. Inside, my father had written, "First installment," meaning, "From you to us." After dinner, he angled his chair toward mine and said, "Now that you're an adult, the meter runs faster." I didn't ask what that meant. Crime movies had taught me enough. The debt balloons. The legs break. You keep moving if you want to keep moving. I had already started pushing against the walls. I picked up more shifts at the grocery store. My feet became these hot, aching countries I carried around. I got very good at bagging avocados like sleeping mice and keeping eggs away from restless bread. I learned to count change by sound. The assistant manager liked me because I never called out and because I stayed late when someone had a family thing, which was always a coded way of saying, "I have the kind of family that makes going home sound better than staying here." I didn't. Home was a tax. There was this scene the week after graduation that still makes my jaw clench. I was in my room, packing a duffel bag with clothes that smelled like detergent and the ghost of our dryer. My plan was the dorms for fall and a room in a crappy off-campus apartment for summer. My mother watched from the doorway, arms folded. "So," she said, almost cheerful, "you're leaving." My father hovered behind her like a shadow you can't turn your back on. "Rent?" he asked. I said I'd saved. He laughed. "Rent here," he clarified, like I was slow. "Summer months. You're still under our roof." The phrase made my molars ache. "I start paying for my own roof in September," I said. "Until then, I'll cover groceries." He licked his teeth, thinking. "Half," he said. "You pay half." My mother nodded, the ledger already opening in her mind. I did the math and said yes. Later that night, I lay awake and felt the floor tilt like a ship. The dorm in September was barely larger than a one-car garage, and I loved it like it had a personality. There were cinder block walls I tacked pictures onto, boring stock photos I'd printed from the campus computer lab, because I didn't have many. There was a desk with decades of carved initials and an outlet that crackled. My roommate was a kid named Javi who glued his textbooks and half his life with duct tape and whose laugh shook the springs in his bed. He had parents who sent him care packages full of snacks and goofy socks. He shared without commentary, without a ledger attached. I ate a bag of trail mix one night at 2 a.m. while we crammed for calculus, and I cried silently in the dark, chewing around the tears, because generosity with no receipt felt like contraband. Money was a constant, humming problem. I worked at the campus dining hall, hairnet and all, and at a tutoring center where I charged $10 to explain algebra to kids with eyelids too heavy to fight. I learned to live on lists. Rice, beans, canned tomatoes, eggs when they were cheap, pasta always. I got a used ThinkPad from a guy who backed up everything to a thumb drive shaped like a surfboard. The T key stuck. I pounded it until my finger had a callus like a guitar player's, except my instrument was dead avoidance. I learned Excel on that machine like it was a language people used to tell the truth. Sum, if, VLOOKUP, pivot tables. The cells were squares of order in a world that had none. My parents did not fade when I left. They orbited, tugging. Sunday mornings, my phone would buzz. "Mom, church was beautiful today. Wish you'd been there." "Dad, cars need maintenance when the weather changes." "Mom, your cousin got engaged. We got them a gift for both of us." "Dad, don't forget your loans are technically ours." It was like a rain of pebbles designed to make me look up, to soften me to requests that came wrapped in guilt. When I did go home, it was worse. The notebook lived on, now basically performance art. My mother would place it on the table and lay her hand on it the way some people do a Bible. "We're not pressuring you," she'd say. "We just want you to succeed." Translation: success is measured in how fast you funnel cash our way. Once, sophomore year, I brought a bag of groceries from a co-op where the apples looked like they had never met a bruise. I set them on the counter. My mother pulled out an apple, turned it in her hands, and then set it down like it was frivolous. "We didn't have these when I was a kid," she said. "We had bruised ones. We made do." My father's eye slid to me. "We made you," he said, and smiled like he'd landed a punch. I wanted to go outside and scream until my throat was a popped balloon. I started keeping my own books. It happened almost by accident, a private counterspell. In a dollar store spiral with blue lines that bled, I wrote what I spent and why. Bus pass, $20. Resume printing, $3. 50. Coffee for Javi when he flunked a quiz, $2. 25. Vitamins because I was tired in a way sleep didn't fix, $7. 99. I noted money that flowed in too. Dining hall paycheck, $142. 44. Tutoring, $40 cash in a folded envelope that smelled like someone else's house. Gifts didn't go in the ledger because I decided they were not transactional. Pizza days with Javi's care package didn't go in either. That was my rule. I was building a framework that said some things are free, and that freedom is the point. There were phone calls where my mother would sigh so gently it felt rehearsed. "Do you remember how we saved to give you that trip to D.C.? In 8th grade?" she'd ask. "You love the museums." Behind her voice, the unspoken, "What is the value of a memory?" I would say, "I do remember. Thank you." She would say, "You'll return the favor." My father was less subtle. "You're good at numbers," he said once. "So you know how compounding works." I said, "I do," and thought compound this. Junior year, I got an internship at a logistics company, the kind of place that names conference rooms after birds. I learned to track boxes and money as if they were the same thing. I learned that small inefficiencies sink ships. I learned that if you present your numbers calmly, most people will not. I learned to be calm. The manager, a woman with sharp handwriting and softer eyes, told me I had a talent for finding leaks. I saved my internship pay and didn't tell my parents. When my father called and said the water heater had gone and we're drowning over here, I said, "I'm sorry to hear that," and felt the ground tilt under me as I held my line. He called me ungrateful. I hung up and threw up in a bathroom that smelled like lemon cleaner. Calm is a practice. So is shaking. There were nights I almost folded. Senior year fall, I got sick with something that wasn't the flu but felt like my body had been unplugged. I missed shifts. The tutoring money dried up for a stretch. I went to the campus clinic, where a nurse told me gently to eat more and to stop treating stress like a vitamin. I called my mother because I wanted someone to tell me to sleep and that I was loved. She said, "We can send something, but remember we're still paying off the minivan." Then, almost as an afterthought, "You know we still have your bank information." I told her no. "We're family," she said, wounded. "We've sacrificed." I said, "I know." I hung up and sat on the curb outside the clinic until the concrete leached the heat from me and a guy on a skateboard tripped and asked if I was okay. I said, "I'm working on it." The day I graduated, the sun was so bright the bleachers looked like teeth. My parents showed up with a card and a smile that felt like a contract. My father clapped me on the back and said, "Now you can start paying us back for real," like a joke that isn't. My mother cried damp circles into my gown and whispered, "We're so proud of you. You'll make us whole." I smiled for photos with my arm around their shoulders because that's what people do. Later, when I was alone with the cap and the tassel and the quiet, I took the card from them and looked at the check inside. $100, memo line, for the future. I laughed. It sounded like breaking. I found a room after college in a house that leaned. My window looked out on a brick wall with a graffiti heart on it that kept flaking away. I had 2 roommates, a nurse who worked nights and a guy who fixed HVAC systems and came home smelling like dust and heat. I worked at a small firm that needed someone to make sense of spreadsheets left behind by a man who'd resigned to find himself. I made myself useful. I wore the same 2 dress shirts in rotation. I learned not to flinch when my phone lit up with my parents' names. I bought my own trash bags for the first time and felt like I'd cleared a mountain. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't tidy, but it was mine. The ledger in my head still spoke, but softer now. When my mother called and said, "Christmas is coming," I said, "I'll mail gifts." When my father said, "Come fix my laptop," I said, "Take it to a shop," and he said, "You owe us." And I said nothing and clicked end. I started to believe the thought that had once been just a splinter under the skin. Maybe I won't. Maybe I will never pay the ledger that lives on their fridge. I didn't know it yet, but I was starting to plan. Not revenge, not yet. Just a life where the math worked differently. Where the roof over my head was paid for by me, full stop. Where apologies weren't currency. Where love wasn't an invoice. Where, oh, could be a choice to be kind, not a cudgel. I started, quietly, to collect numbers. Not theirs, mine. And numbers, in my world, have a way of becoming a plan. By my mid-20s, I'd built a rhythm. Work, save, avoid. Work meant 10-hour days in an office that smelled like carpet glue and burned coffee, staring at spreadsheets that looked like cities at night. Save meant brown rice, off-brand laundry detergent, and a car that rattled every time it hit 40 miles per hour. Avoid meant calls from my parents I let roll to voicemail, texts I answered with busy, we'll call later, a promise I rarely kept. The silence between us wasn't complete yet. It still pulsed with obligation, guilt, and habit, but it was beginning to stretch, elastic, and dangerous. They never let me forget that the ledger still existed. Birthdays became mini trials. My mom would call and say, "Do you remember how we threw you a party at Chuck E. Cheese when you turned 7? We didn't even like pizza. That was for you." My dad would chime in, "Remember your braces? Thousands of dollars. You're lucky we didn't just let your teeth rot." Then, without fail, "We'll get it back from you someday." When I was 25, I got my first real taste of professional respect. My boss asked me to present to a client. It was just a mid-sized logistics company, nothing glamorous. But when I stood in front of the projector and explained how their shipping costs could drop if they consolidated suppliers, the room went quiet in that way that means people are listening. Afterward, the client shook my hand and said, "This is the first time I've understood this mess." I walked back to my desk with my chest buzzing, and for a second, I thought, maybe I've broken the cycle. Maybe this is what useful feels like. That night I called my mom, thinking maybe, just maybe, I could share good news without it being twisted. "They liked my presentation," I said, smiling into the receiver. "They might even give us a bigger contract." There was a pause. Then her voice, sugar over stone. "Well, you're finally starting to pay us back." My father yelled from the background, "About time." I laughed weakly and hung up early. My stomach churned all night. Every victory was already spent in their ledger. I started dating around that time, badly. One girlfriend, Anna, asked me once why I always double-checked bills at restaurants. "Splitting things down to the cent, it's just easier to round," she said, amused. I told her I liked accuracy, but the truth was, in my head, every cent mattered. Every cent was proof I wasn't slipping into debt, not to a bank, not to my parents, not to anyone. She eventually left, saying I kept my guard up like I was waiting for an attack. She wasn't wrong. The real break began the year I turned 27. I'd just gotten a raise big enough that, for the first time in my life, I felt breathing room. Nothing extravagant. I still took the bus some days, still checked grocery prices, but enough that I could put money away and not feel like disaster was one missed paycheck away. I celebrated alone by buying a leather wallet that cost more than I'd ever spent on something that wasn't necessary. When I slipped it into my pocket, it felt like armor. That same month, my dad called. "We're thinking of redoing the bathroom," he said. "No hello, no small talk. You'll help cover it." I was quiet long enough that he barked, "Still there?" I said, "No, I won't." Silence. Then, the word he always fell back on, ungrateful. My mother grabbed the phone. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice dripping with practiced disappointment, "we're not asking for charity. This is your debt. We sacrificed for you." I hung up. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the wallet on the floor. After that, I went low contact. Not fully no contact yet, but I built walls. Calls became texts. Texts became silence. I skipped Thanksgiving that year, claiming work. I mailed a card for Christmas and nothing else. My mother left a voicemail crying about how family doesn't abandon each other. My father left one calling me a user. I deleted them both. For the first time, I didn't feel the itch to call back. The distance gave me space to think, and with space came a dangerous idea. What if I could quantify it? All of it. What if I could take their weapon, the ledger, and turn it against them? The thought first came as a flicker, like a joke whispered by the part of me that had grown up choking on numbers. But it stuck. I began reading government reports about the average cost of raising a child in the 1990s. I downloaded data on food inflation, healthcare, clothing. I found old yearbooks and photos where I was wearing certain brands, and I cross-referenced how much those cost back then. At first, it was just a distraction, something to quiet the buzzing in my head. But soon it became more. I stayed up late, spreadsheets open, piecing together a forensic accounting of my own childhood. I remembered the braces, so I pulled dental fee schedules from that decade. I remembered the D.C. trip, so I checked travel costs for that year. I even estimated utilities, square footage by square footage, using public records. It was meticulous, obsessive, and the whole time, a voice in my head whispered, "This is how you win." Meanwhile, my career grew. By 30, I had left the firm and launched my own consultancy with two friends. We started small, working from coffee shops, eating stale bagels at meetings. But companies noticed us because we were ruthless with numbers. Within a year, we landed enough contracts to hire staff. By 32, we had an office and clients in 3 states. My income multiplied. I wasn't rich, but I was solid independent. I bought a modest condo with my own name on the deed. I stood in the empty living room the first night, staring at the keys in my hand, and thought, this is my roof. No one gets to weaponize it. My parents, of course, saw my success through the only lens they had. "Now you can finally pay us back properly," my father said in one of the last conversations we had. My mother sighed dreamily in the background. "We always knew you'd make good. You'll take care of us." I didn't argue. I just said, "We'll see." Then I went back to my spreadsheet and kept adjusting the numbers. By the time I was 33, the calculation was nearly complete. The total number stared back at me in black and white, cold and final. It wasn't exaggerated. If anything, I was generous in rounding upward. It was a number that felt like both a weight and a weapon. I realized I wasn't just running from them anymore. I was building the moment where I could end it on my terms. I wasn't thinking of revenge the way movies show it. Dramatic confrontations, screaming, tears. I didn't want theatrics. I wanted finality. A clean cut. An invoice closed. Every time they called, every voicemail that said, "You owe us," only sharpened the edge of my plan. I started transferring extra savings into an account labeled closure. I stopped explaining myself to friends when I ignored family holidays. I kept quiet, calculating, waiting for the right moment. The thing about numbers is they don't lie. My parents had spent my whole life using math as a weapon. Bowls of cereal broken into pennies, braces into thousands, love into line items. Now, I was going to give them exactly what they wanted. No more, no less. And once the ledger was balanced, I would be free. By 33, I had 2 lives running parallel. The one everyone saw, me in clean shirts, shaking hands with clients, eating lunches I didn't have to price check, and the one no one saw. Hours alone at my dining table, a spreadsheet open like a map, tracing the cost of my existence line by line. I called the file repayment_final. XLSX. I wasn't reckless about it. I approached it like any other project. Step 1. Gather data. I dug through old papers I'd kept in a cardboard box labeled college stuff. There were crumpled report cards, a faded receipt for my senior prom tux, even a yellowing dental bill with paid stamped across the top. I scanned them all, then cross-referenced with average costs from those years. USDA reports told me the average monthly food expense for a household of 3 in the mid-90s. Department of Labor tables showed average clothing costs. I layered those figures with the specific scraps I had. Step 2. Categorize. I made columns. Housing, food, utilities, clothing, healthcare, education, miscellaneous, trips, activities. Under each I plugged in the numbers, year by year, adjusted for inflation so there could be no argument about today's money. Step 3. Sanity check. I wasn't stingy. If the data gave a range, I picked the higher end. If I couldn't prove I covered something myself, I assumed they had. I even added interest, not the punishing kind my father liked to reference, but a fair, conservative rate. I wanted this airtight. I wanted, if they ever dared question it, to shove the evidence across the table and say, "Here." Down to the cent. The total climbed slowly, like a thermometer in the sun. $132,000. $156,000. By the time I finished, it rested at just over $211,743. 56, a number so precise it hummed. For weeks, I just stared at it. Sometimes late at night, I'd open the file and sit in the glow of the screen, tracing the numbers with my eyes. That figure wasn't just money. It was the embodiment of every sigh, every guilt trip, every "you owe us." It was my cage translated into digits. While I was calculating, my parents were circling. My father called one night, his voice slurred from beer. "You know we're not getting younger," he said. "The roof needs fixing, insurance is going up. It's time you step up." I leaned back in my chair, looking at the total on my screen. "I'm working on it," I said. It was the first time in years I didn't feel cornered saying those words. My mother texted me a week later. "Your cousin helps his parents with bills every month. They didn't give him half of what we gave you." I didn't reply. Instead, I added a note to my spreadsheet. Emotional surcharge, incalculable. Then I deleted it. This wasn't about embellishment. This was about precision. The plan crystallized slowly. I'd repay them exactly. No interest beyond what I'd already included. No rounding up to be kind. Once the transfer cleared, I would block them everywhere. No theatrics, no confrontation. Just silence. A silence I would own. Execution became its own project plan. Open a separate account. I moved the exact total into it. Nothing more, nothing less. Draft the transfer note. I tested different phrasings, but kept circling back to the simplest: debt repaid. Set digital boundaries. I combed through my phone, email, even LinkedIn, mapping every channel they could use to reach me. I prepared block lists like a soldier laying mines. Decide the date. This was harder. It needed to mean something. After some thought, I chose my 34th birthday, the same age my father had been when I was born. A symmetry he'd never recognize, but I'd savor. In the months leading up, I noticed a strange shift inside me. I started sleeping better. The buzzing in my chest eased, like a swarm finally losing interest. At work, I smiled more, genuinely. My staff joked I seemed lighter. I didn't explain. I bought a new suit. Not flashy, navy, tailored enough to fit right. When I tried it on, I thought of all the times my father had sneered at me in hand-me-downs. I thought of my mother holding receipts like verdicts. This suit, I told myself, was not an entry in anyone's book but mine. Even my dog seemed to notice. He curled closer on the couch, less restless when I worked late. Dogs know. Of course, they still reached out. 2 months before my birthday, my father left a voicemail. "We're thinking of downsizing. Maybe you can help with the down payment." His tone was almost casual, like asking me to grab milk from the store. A week later, my mother emailed me an old photo of me in a Halloween costume. A pirate, age 9. "We made this from scratch for you," she wrote. "You don't remember the work we put in." I stared at the screen. I remembered. I also remembered her snapping at me for spilling apple cider on it, saying, "Do you know how much fabric costs?" I filed the photo away in a folder called Evidence. The night before my birthday, I sat at my table with a whiskey I'd been saving. The spreadsheet glowed, final and complete. My hands shook, not with fear, but with anticipation, the kind you feel before cutting a cord. I whispered it out loud, testing the words I'd been holding on to for decades: debt repaid. It felt clean. It felt final. The next morning, I woke up early. My 34th birthday. The air was cool, sharp with autumn. I made coffee, walked my dog, came back and opened my laptop. The transfer screen waited, numbers lined up like soldiers. I typed the total carefully: 211,743. 56. I copied my chosen note: debt repaid. My finger hovered over the mouse. For a moment, I thought of being 8 years old again, staring at that marble notebook on top of the fridge, listening to the sound of pen scratching, my parents tallying my worth. I thought of the nights I lay awake calculating the cost of breathing under their roof. Then I clicked. Transfer complete. A quiet ping, anticlimactic and perfect. I sat back. Exhaled. My chest felt hollowed out, scraped clean. Then I began the second half of the plan. I blocked their numbers, one by one. Phone, text, email, Facebook, Instagram. Even their old AOL accounts I wasn't sure they still used. I built a wall taller than the house I grew up in. When it was done, I shut my laptop. The silence was immediate, heavy, but not suffocating. For the first time in my life, silence felt like mine. The thing about closure is you imagine fireworks, a symphony, some grand cinematic swell. But mine was quiet. A man at a table, coffee mug cooling, dog snoring on the couch, A ledger finally closed. It was enough. And for the first time, I believed it. I owed them nothing. Nothing at all. The morning after the transfer felt different, though not in the way I expected. No fireworks, no flood of adrenaline, no cinematic rush. Just stillness. The dog pawed at the back door. I poured kibble into his bowl. The coffee maker hissed. Everything was ordinary, and yet underneath it, I could feel something had shifted. I checked my bank app one more time, not because I doubted the transaction, but because I wanted to see the number gone. 211,743.56. Withdrawn, confirmed, history. I scrolled down to the note attached to the transfer, debt repaid. Seeing those words on an official ledger, not scribbled in my parents' rooster notebook, but stamped into a system bigger than all of us, made me laugh out loud. It wasn't a bitter laugh either. It was sharp, clean. Then came the silence. By noon, I expected a call, or a text, or an email. Nothing. My parents checked their accounts religiously. My mother used to log into online banking like it was a hobby. I pictured her opening the app, her eyes widening. My father hovering behind her, jaw tightening. I could almost hear the argument starting. He paid. He thinks that's it? Well, he's right, isn't he? No, he owes us more. Respect, time, loyalty. But if that fight happened, it happened in their house, not mine. My phone stayed dark. I went to work. Numbers, emails, meetings. My staff surprised me with a cake for my birthday, candles melting into frosting. I smiled, blew them out, and realized I didn't need to make a wish. I had already given myself what I'd wanted most, release. That night, when I got home, the voicemails were waiting. 4 of them. The first was my mother, her voice trembling with something between shock and rage. We saw the transfer. What is this supposed to mean? Debt repaid? That's it. That's all our years of sacrifice mean to you. The second was my father, louder. You think money covers what you owe? You think you can just buy your way out of family? His breath was heavy, like he'd been pacing. This isn't done. The third was my mother again, crying this time. How could you be so cruel? We gave you everything. You were our only child. You don't do this to family. You don't. The fourth was quieter. My father again. His tone had shifted, not soft, but calculated. Fine, if that's how you want it. Debt repaid. Then we're done with you too. Don't come crawling back when you need us. He hung up hard. I listened once, deleted them all, and blocked their numbers completely. The silence after that felt like standing in a house after a storm has passed. Walls intact, but the air charged empty. In the days that followed, I noticed how much space they had taken up in my head. I'd walk into the grocery store and instinctively calculate the price of a loaf of bread, expecting to hear my father's voice reminding me how much they'd spent on me. But instead, I caught myself and thought, not anymore. I could buy the bread. Or not. It was mine to decide. At night, I stopped rehearsing arguments with them in my head. I used to lie awake scripting things I'd never say. You're wrong about me. I don't owe you. Love doesn't work like that. Now, the silence was so wide I could fall asleep in it. One Saturday morning, I cleaned out my closet and found that old spiral notebook I'd kept in college, the one where I logged every expense to stay sane. I flipped through it. Entries like ramen, $1, 19, and printer paper, $4.50. Next to each, little notes in the margin, necessary, optional, gift. I closed the notebook and slid it into the trash bag. I didn't need it anymore. Of course, my parents didn't go quietly. Blocked numbers don't mean blocked attempts. They emailed from new addresses, subject lines screaming, "We need to talk." They tried to contact me on LinkedIn, of all places, sending connection requests like we were colleagues. My mother even mailed a handwritten letter. I didn't open it. Straight into the shredder. The last attempt was through an old neighbor, Mrs. P., who texted me out of the blue. "Your parents are worried. Maybe give them a call." I stared at her message for a long time, then typed back, "Please don't get involved. It's not what you think." She didn't reply, and I haven't heard from her since. Every time they tried to claw back into my life, the same thought replayed in my head. I paid you. I'm done. Something unexpected happened too. My definition of debt started to change. One evening, I met an old friend for dinner. We'd lost touch, partly because I'd been so wrapped in survival, partly because I hated owing anyone even the smallest thing. After we ate, she reached for the check. I froze, that old instinct rising. the ledger in my head whispering, "You'll owe her." But she just smiled. "I got this. Consider it a birthday gift." For once, I didn't argue. I didn't scribble the cost down later. I let it be a gift. No debt, no tally, just kindness. And it felt light. I started practicing that. Letting friends buy me a drink. Bringing bagels to the office without calculating who ate how many. Sending flowers to a colleague going through a divorce, not because I owed her support, but because it was human. Little acts, free of accounting. A week after the transfer, I dreamed of the Rooster notebook. It sat on the counter, cover warped from years of kitchen heat. In the dream, I picked it up and flipped through. Every page was blank. I turned it upside down, shook it. Nothing. Then I set it on the stove and watched the edges curl and flame. I woke up smiling. People sometimes imagine revenge as this roaring satisfaction, like the villain gets crushed and you walk away triumphant. My revenge wasn't like that. It was quiet, clinical, surgical. I gave them exactly what they demanded my whole life. I paid the debt, and in doing so, I severed the only tether they'd ever claimed to have over me. They can tell themselves whatever story they want now, that I'm ungrateful, that I'm cruel, that money can't replace love. But I know the truth. They never offered love. They offered a transaction. I closed it. Now, when I walk through my condo and see the sunlight spilling across the floorboards I paid for, I don't hear their voices. I don't feel the weight of their ledger. I feel mine. My roof. My rules. My life. And for the first time, I don't feel like a debtor. I feel free. But freedom, I realized, wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something else, rebuilding a life without their voices in it. Learning what love looks like without receipts. And that was harder and scarier than I expected. The first month after cutting them off, I kept waiting for the guilt to come crashing down. That was how it had always worked before. I'd stand my ground, then lie awake rehearsing every accusation they'd thrown at me until it hollowed me out. But this time, nothing. Just an odd, humming quiet, like the static in my brain had finally gone offline. I started noticing small things I'd never had the bandwidth for. The way my dog's ears flicked when he dreamed. The smell of rain on hot asphalt drifting through my condo's cracked window. The sound of my own laugh when a coworker told a stupid joke. These details used to get drowned out by a constant ticker tape in my head. What do I owe? What do I need to apologize for? How much until I'm even? Without that noise, life felt sharper, almost startling. Of course, there were phantom echoes. One Saturday morning, I stood in the grocery store staring at a display of cereal boxes. For years, cereal was the trigger, the second bowl, the lecture about milk, the math lesson disguised as punishment. My hand hovered, waiting for the guilt to spike, for my father's voice to rasp in my skull. It didn't. I picked up 2 boxes, tossed them in the cart, and smiled. Cereal. Just cereal. At work, people said I seemed more relaxed. My assistant joked, "Did you get a massage or something? You're glowing." I laughed it off, but the truth was, I'd shed a 20-year weight. When clients pushed back on my recommendations, I didn't feel defensive the way I used to. I didn't hear my father's voice in their criticism. I just explained again, calmly, until they understood. It made me better at my job. One afternoon, during a team meeting, I looked around at the people who worked for me, young analysts, a project manager with 2 kids, an intern scribbling notes, and it hit me. I was responsible for them, but not in the way my parents meant it. Not as leverage, not as debt. Responsibility without a ledger. It was a revelation. The attempts from my parents dwindled. At first, they came weekly. New numbers, strange email addresses, even postcards with forced cheer. Then, after a few months, they stopped entirely. That silence was a test of its own. A part of me expected it to feel like abandonment, but instead it felt like oxygen. For the first time in my life, they weren't watching. The cage door was open, and I wasn't looking back. One night, I dreamed of walking into my childhood home. Everything was exactly the same. The rooster on the fridge, the beige carpet, the door that rattled in the winter. The marble notebook sat on the counter, fat with years of scribbles. In the dream, I opened it. But instead of lists of expenses, it contained pages of my own handwriting. Stories I'd written in 4th grade, poems, doodles. All the things they'd dismissed as useless. I woke up with tears drying on my face and realized the ledger was mine now. I could write whatever I wanted in it. I began trying things I'd always denied myself. Small, almost silly things. I bought concert tickets without scanning the price 3 times. I signed up for a pottery class just because I'd always been curious. The first time I sat at the wheel, clay splattering my shirt, I thought, this is money they'd have called wasted. And then I laughed, because it wasn't theirs anymore. It was mine. I even dipped a toe into dating again. This time, I was honest about my past. Over dinner with someone kind-eyed and patient, I said, my parents treated raising me like an investment they expected a return on. She didn't flinch. She just nodded, squeezed my hand across the table, and said, that sounds heavy, but it sounds like you're free now. I felt something unclench in me. The true test came 6 months after the transfer. My car broke down. Old me would have spiraled, hearing my father's sneer. You think writing nice words will pay for a new engine? But standing in the mechanic's shop, listening to him list repairs, I just nodded. Do it, I said. I pulled out my card and paid. No panic, no phantom guilt. Just a transaction between 2 adults. That night, I realized that was the difference. My parents had used money as a weapon, a leash, a measure of my worth. I was learning that money could just be money. A tool, not a chain. Around this time, I started journaling. Nothing fancy, just a leather notebook where I dumped thoughts before bed. One entry I keep coming back to read. They taught me that love is debt, that life is debt, that everything has to be paid back. Today, I bought flowers for no reason. No ledger, no balance sheet, just color and smell and joy. Maybe that's what love actually is, something you give without expecting return. Writing it down felt like rewiring my brain. Then, unexpectedly, I got word about them. A mutual cousin called, someone I hadn't heard from in years. Hey, he said awkwardly. I know you're not really in touch with your folks, but your dad had a health scare. He's okay, but, maybe call? I thanked him, hung up, and sat in silence. The old script flared. You owe them care now. This is the bill coming due. But then I thought of that transfer. The finality of it. Debt repaid. My chest didn't tighten. My palms didn't sweat. I just whispered out loud. Not my problem. I didn't call. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a monster for choosing myself. I felt sane. The further I got from them, the more I noticed how many people carried similar chains. A colleague confided her parents called her selfish for moving away. A friend admitted his dad guilted him into wiring money every month. Listening, I felt a strange mix of anger and solidarity. I started sharing bits of my story, not all the details, but enough. More than once, people's eyes widened and they said, God, I thought I was the only one. That became its own kind of revenge too. Not just paying back the money, but proving they couldn't silence me. Their story was no longer the only version. A year out, my birthday rolled around again. 35. I took the day off, hiked a trail outside the city, and sat at the summit with my dog panting beside me. The view stretched wide, a quilt of green and gray and sky. I thought about that kid at 8 years old, begging for a second bowl of cereal and being told he was already in debt. I wanted to reach back through time and tell him, one day, you'll balance the ledger. One day, you'll walk away. One day, you'll sit on a mountain and realize you don't owe them anything. Not a cent, not a word, not your life. And for the first time, I felt not just free, but proud. Because survival is one thing, but turning survival into a life you own, that's the real triumph. And I wasn't done yet. I was just getting started. It's been almost 2 years since I pressed send on that transfer. 2 years since I typed debt repaid and built a wall of blocks taller than the roof I grew up under. Sometimes I forget it happened at all. Life moves forward, and I'm busy with work, friends, the dog, the 1,000 tiny rituals that make up a normal existence. Other times, the memory comes rushing back like a film reel. The marble notebook, the serial lecture, my father's sneer, my mother's sigh. And then, the click of the mouse, the ping of confirmation. That was the day my life split into before and after. Before, a ledger I never asked for. After, silence I chose. I've learned something about silence. It isn't empty. It fills. At first, it was just absence. No calls, no voicemails, no emails with subject lines like you'll regret this. But slowly, the space became fertile. I started writing again. Nothing polished, just scraps of stories, half-formed essays, observations about the world. The same kind of words my parents once dismissed as useless. Only now, I write them for me, not for validation. One night, I sat at my desk typing and realized I hadn't thought about usefulness all day. Not once. I had laughed with coworkers, sent invoices, walked my dog, cooked dinner, and none of it had been filtered through their ledger. That realization made me tear up. Freedom isn't always fireworks. Sometimes it's just the quiet shock of realizing a chain has slipped off without you noticing. People ask, sometimes, if I regret it. If there's a hole where my parents used to be. The truth is complicated. Yes, there's a hole, but it isn't one that aches. It's more like scar tissue. Something that marks where damage once was, but no longer bleeds. The closest thing to regret is that I wasted so many years believing them. Believing I was expensive. Believing love had a price tag. Believing my life was a loan I'd never finish repaying. I mourn the kid who swallowed that message whole. But regret for cutting them off? None. Not for a second. Their names still pop up occasionally, mentioned by relatives, overheard in passing. A cousin messaged me last Christmas. Your folks had a rough year. You sure you don't want to reach out? I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I replied, no. I settled my debt. I wish them well, but I'm done. It felt strange, putting it into words like that. But it was the truth. And truth, after years of their gaslighting, is the sweetest form of revenge. I've built new definitions for family. Some are friends I've known for years, who show up without asking for anything in return. Some are colleagues who've become confidants. Even my dog. His loyalty is uncomplicated, his joy unmeasured. No ledgers, no tallies, just presence. I also found myself mentoring a younger employee, a kid fresh out of school who reminded me too much of myself at 21. Nervous, second-guessing every move, waiting for someone to tell him he was enough. I caught myself one afternoon saying to him, you don't owe me anything. You just owe yourself the effort to try. He blinked like I'd spoken another language. Then he smiled. That moment stuck with me. Maybe breaking the cycle isn't just about freeing myself. It's about refusing to pass the debt mindset forward. Every so often, I return to the number 211,743. 56. I don't check my bank app anymore, but I keep the spreadsheet tucked away. Not as proof, not as a weapon. As a reminder. That number used to haunt me. Now it's just history. A closed case file. My parents thought it was leverage, but I turned it into a receipt. They can't dangle it over me anymore. And the irony? They always wanted repayment. They got it. Exactly what they demanded. Nothing more. Nothing less. They asked for a transaction instead of love, and I gave them the transaction. My revenge wasn't screaming or fighting. It was precision. It was balance. I didn't beat them at their game. I ended the game. This is the part of the story where people expect me to say I've forgiven them. I haven't. Forgiveness implies I owe them peace, that I should hand them absolution like another installment. I don't owe them that. What I have done is let go. Not for them, but for me. The anger that used to boil in my chest has cooled into something steadier, clarity. They are who they are, and I am free from them. On my last birthday, I took myself to dinner at a restaurant that overlooked the water. I ordered the tasting menu without glancing at the prices. Halfway through, the waiter set down a small bowl, cereal, reinvented as some fancy dessert with custard and fruit foam. I laughed so hard I startled the couple at the next table. That second bowl of cereal had once been my initiation into debt. Now it was just food. Just sweetness. I savored every bite. Sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, I imagine what they must have felt, seeing that transfer, reading those words. Shock, anger, disbelief. Maybe even fear, because they realized they no longer had control. But I don't dwell on it. Their feelings aren't mine to carry. My story doesn't end with their reaction. It ends with mine. And mine is simple. Peace. If you've read this far, maybe you've lived with parents like mine. Maybe you've been told you're expensive, that you owe, that love is a balance sheet. If so, let me tell you what I wish someone had told me when I was 8, begging for a second bowl of cereal. You don't owe them for doing the bare minimum. You don't owe anyone your life just because they gave you one. Love is not a debt. And if they insist it is, then one day, you can pay it off on your terms and walk away. That's the real closure. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, just freedom. So that's my story. 34 years old, debt repaid, silence claimed. My parents may never understand it, but I don't need them to. Because the only ledger that matters now is the one I write for myself. And in it, the balance is finally, perfectly, gloriously zero.